What if the very person you fear becoming is the one you were always meant to be? Imagine for a moment that the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the traits you've tried to hide, and the emotions you've buried deep down are not weaknesses or flaws, but the missing keys to who you really are. Carl Jung believed that our greatest growth lies exactly where we are most afraid to look. Fear doesn't just point to danger, it points to potential. The self you've been running from may actually be the self you've been searching for all along. From the very beginning of life, we learn to play roles. We smile when it's expected, stay quiet when told, and shape our behavior to earn approval. Over time, these habits form what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. It helps us survive, but it comes at a cost. The more we identify with this mask, the more we forget about what exists behind it. Deep beneath the surface, there is another side of us that we rarely acknowledge. The shadow. The shadow is made up of the qualities we push away, the feelings we were told were wrong, the impulses we suppressed to be accepted. Maybe you were told as a child to stop being too emotional, so you buried your sensitivity. Maybe you were laughed at for being creative, so you hid your imagination. These rejected parts don't vanish. They wait in the dark, shaping your thoughts and reactions in ways you don't even realize. Sometimes the very traits you dislike in other people are reflections of your own shadow, trying to get your attention. Here is where the fear comes in. To face your shadow is to face the person you fear to be. It feels risky to peel back the mask and look at what you've hidden. But Jung taught that this is where real life begins. Growth is not about polishing the mask. It is about daring to step into the unknown parts of yourself. The question is, are you willing to confront the self you fear? Because on the other side of that fear is freedom. Tell me in the comments, what's one fear you feel has been holding you back? The mask may protect you, but it also imprisons you. The more tightly you hold onto it, the more you risk losing the deeper parts of who you are. Think about it. How often do you find yourself saying things just to keep the peace, doing things just to be accepted, or hiding what you really feel because you're afraid of how others will react? In those moments, you are not living from your authentic self. You are living from the persona. Jung believed that when we mistake the mask for the real self, we cut ourselves off from a vast inner world that is waiting to be explored. The shadow, on the other hand, is the storage room of the psyche. It's where all the disowned pieces of yourself live. The anger you never expressed, the desires you thought were shameful, the talents you abandoned because someone once told you they weren't practical, all of these sit in the shadow. The irony is that what we push away often holds some of our greatest power. Sensitivity can become empathy. Rejected creativity can turn into innovation. Even fear itself, when understood, can transform into courage. But this transformation only happens when we stop running. You've probably experienced projection even if you didn't know it by name. It's when something about another person triggers a strong reaction in you. Maybe you dislike their arrogance or their carelessness. Jung would say that the intensity of your reaction may reveal something hidden within yourself. The qualities that disturb us most in others are often the qualities we have not accepted in ourselves. This doesn't mean you are arrogant if arrogance bothers you. It means there may be a part of you that longs to be more confident, but was shamed into silence. The shadow speaks in these ways, not to haunt you, but to guide you back to wholeness. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable. That's why most people never do it. We prefer distraction over introspection. We bury ourselves in work, scroll endlessly on social media, or numb ourselves with entertainment just to avoid sitting quietly with our thoughts. Silence can be frightening because it allows the shadow to whisper. Yet Jung insisted that only by turning toward those whispers can we uncover what we've denied. True transformation doesn't come from ignoring discomfort, but from leaning into it with curiosity. Take the fear of rejection as an example. Many people silence their opinions or avoid expressing love because they dread being judged, abandoned, or misunderstood. But where does this fear really come from? Often it traces back to an early wound, a moment in childhood when you felt unseen or unworthy. That wound sinks into the unconscious and shapes your choices for years. You think you're avoiding rejection, but in truth you are avoiding the memory of pain. By shining light on that shadow, you take away its secret power. You begin to realize that rejection does not define your worth. It only reveals where healing is needed. Imagine living without the weight of these fears. Imagine speaking your truth without hesitation, making decisions not based on expectations, but on what resonates deeply within you. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating both the persona and the shadow. Individuation is not about constructing a brand new self. It is about rediscovering the forgotten pieces of the self that were always there. This journey requires courage because it asks you to face what you fear most, yourself. But once you begin, you will notice patterns. You will see how your wounds shaped your choices, how your suppressed desires influenced your behavior, and how the qualities you admire or hate in others reflect unacknowledged parts of you. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. The moment you choose to stop running from these truths, you begin to reclaim your real identity. Most people spend their lives as strangers to themselves, convinced they already know who they are. They define their identity by their name, job, culture, or past experiences. But beneath those labels lies a far more complex and expansive self. The self is not a mask, not a role, and not a story. It is a living, evolving presence that only reveals itself when you are brave enough to confront the shadow. And so I ask you, if you could face one hidden part of yourself today, what would it be? The greatest paradox of personal growth is that the things we resist the most are the very things that can set us free. Fear acts like a guard at the gates of transformation. It whispers warnings, convinces us that stepping forward will lead to disaster, and urges us to stay where it's safe. But Jung argued that fear does not only signal danger, it also signals importance. The reason you fear a certain truth about yourself is because it matters. Behind that fear lies energy, creativity, and strength that you haven't yet claimed. Think about the times you've stood at the edge of something new, speaking in public, telling someone how you really feel, or daring to take a path others don't approve of. In those moments, fear surges through you like a wave. Most of us interpret this as a signal to retreat, but what if it is actually an invitation? What if the intensity of fear means you are brushing against the very part of yourself that's been waiting to come alive? Jung's insight was clear. What you avoid becomes your prison, and what you face becomes your power. Every person carries what he called the shadow, and within that shadow lie both demons and treasures. The shadow is not only a container for pain, anger, and shame. It also holds hidden talents, passions, and truths. When you integrate the shadow, you don't become darker, you become more whole. The person you fear to be may look dangerous or unworthy through the lens of your old conditioning. But in reality, that person may hold the courage you need, the voice you've silenced, or the confidence you've been missing. Integration begins with awareness. You start noticing patterns. Maybe you lash out when criticized, or withdraw whenever conflict arises. Instead of dismissing these reactions, ask yourself what they are trying to teach you. Beneath anger may lie a desire to be respected. Beneath withdrawal may lie a need for safety. The shadow speaks in behaviors, in triggers, and in dreams. It doesn't vanish when ignored. It keeps returning until you decide to listen. One powerful way to understand your shadow is by examining your projections. Notice who irritates you, who fascinates you, and who makes you feel small. These reactions are mirrors reflecting something within you. If arrogance angers you, perhaps part of you wishes it could stand taller without shame. If vulnerability makes you uncomfortable, maybe you have denied your own softness for too long. Every reaction is a clue, and every clue points you back to yourself. But why is this work so frightening? Because confronting the shadow means stripping away illusions. It means admitting that you are not just the polished mask you present to the world. You are also messy, insecure, conflicted, and contradictory. That truth can feel threatening, yet it is also deeply liberating. Once you stop pretending to be perfect, you allow yourself to be real. Once you accept that you have flaws, you stop being controlled by the fear of being exposed. The transformation is gradual. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly become fearless. Instead, you begin with small acts of honesty, telling the truth when you'd usually stay silent, acknowledging a feeling you'd normally suppress, or admitting a weakness instead of hiding it. Each act is like a crack in the mask, letting more light in. Over time, you realize that the person you feared to be is not an enemy but a guide. That hidden self has been carrying your authenticity all along. On the other side of fear is not destruction but freedom. Freedom to speak without rehearsing, to love without conditions, to create without apology. Freedom to stand in the world as a complete human being, shadow included. Jung believed that the purpose of life is individuation, the process of becoming whole by uniting all parts of yourself. The persona, the ego, the shadow, and the deeper self must all come together like pieces of a puzzle. Only then can you live fully, not as an actor playing a role, but as a soul embodying its truth. So the question becomes simple, yet difficult. Will you dare to step into the person you fear to be? Will you allow the discomfort of growth to carry you toward authenticity? Or will you keep hiding behind the mask, safe but incomplete? Fear will always be there, but so will the possibility of transformation. The choice, as always, is yours. Tell me, if fear could no longer control you, what part of yourself would you finally allow to shine? To step into the person you fear to be requires surrendering the idea that safety is the highest goal of life. Safety keeps us alive, but it does not make us fully human. When every decision is built around avoiding pain or judgment, life shrinks into a narrow corridor where nothing new can enter. Jung suggested that the greatest treasures lie in the places we least want to look, which means the path to wholeness always cuts through discomfort. Think of fear as a compass. It doesn't just point to danger, it points to the very direction in which growth is waiting. Facing fear is rarely dramatic. More often it unfolds in subtle, everyday choices. The person who fears rejection avoids deep relationships. The one who fears failure avoids pursuing dreams. The one who fears conflict avoids speaking truth. These choices look ordinary, even responsible, but over years they carve a cage. You may not notice the bars until you realize how small your world has become. At that moment, you face a decision. Keep protecting the mask or risk letting it crack. Cracking the mask begins with honesty. Honesty with yourself about what you want, how you feel, and what you've been avoiding. Most of us are trained to look away from these questions. We fill silence with distractions because silence might reveal truths we're not ready to hear. But those truths are the exact doorway into the self we fear to be. By daring to listen, you begin to integrate the shadow. Instead of being controlled by unconscious patterns, you shine light on them and reclaim choice. Consider the fear of vulnerability. Many people equate vulnerability with weakness. They imagine that opening up will invite rejection or ridicule. But look closer. Isn't it true that your most meaningful connections were built on moments of openness? The laughter that comes when you admit something embarrassing, the relief you feel when someone shares a struggle you thought was only yours. These are moments of authenticity. Vulnerability may feel like exposure, but in reality, it creates intimacy. The shadow of weakness hides the strength of connection. Another example is anger. Anger is often condemned as destructive, and indeed it can be. But suppressed anger doesn't disappear. It festers and leaks out in passive-aggressive remarks or quiet resentment. Jung believed emotions are not to be destroyed, but understood. Beneath anger is usually a demand for respect, fairness, or safety. When acknowledged and expressed constructively, anger becomes fuel for justice and change. What you fear as destructive may actually be your call to assert boundaries and claim dignity. The same applies to creativity. Many people bury creative impulses because they seem impractical or childish. They choose careers that are stable rather than expressive. Yet creativity does not vanish. It waits in the shadow, appearing as envy of others who dare to create, or as restlessness that no amount of success can soothe. The person you fear to be, the one who paints, writes, or sings, may be the person who feels most alive. Fear disguises this aliveness as danger, but once faced, it blossoms into joy. Integration of the shadow is not a single event. It is a lifelong practice. Every stage of life presents new masks to peel away, new fears to confront, new shadows to embrace. The reward is not perfection but wholeness. To be whole means to stand in your contradictions without shame. You are both strong and fragile, both disciplined and chaotic, both light and dark. Accepting this paradox frees you from the exhausting task of pretending. Jung's teaching invites us to live courageously rather than comfortably. Comfort keeps us numb. Courage keeps us awake. The more you lean into fear, the more you discover that it loses its grip. Fear thrives in avoidance but weakens in confrontation. Each time you face a hidden part of yourself, you reclaim energy that was locked away. That energy can be redirected into love, purpose, and creation. So the challenge remains, can you stop treating fear as an enemy and start treating it as a teacher? Every fear you hold is a lesson disguised as a warning. Every shadow you carry is a doorway disguised as darkness. The person you fear to be is not a stranger. It is the unacknowledged part of you, waiting patiently for the day you are ready to come home. If you were to take just one step today toward the version of yourself you fear, what would it look like? Becoming the person you fear to be is not about adopting a new identity, but about reclaiming the one you have denied. Many people misunderstand this work, thinking it means turning into someone dark or dangerous. But Jung's message was that the qualities we fear are often distorted by our resistance. What looks like weakness may actually be sensitivity. What looks like selfishness may actually be self-respect. And what looks like chaos may actually be untapped creativity. The fear exaggerates while acceptance reveals. By leaning into the fear, you strip away distortion and meet the truth beneath it. Consider the way children explore the world. They try, fail, cry, laugh, and keep going without shame. Over time, though, parents, teachers, and society send signals about which behaviors are acceptable and which are not. A child learns to perform certain traits for approval and to hide others to avoid punishment. The hidden ones sink into the shadow. Years later, the adult wonders why confidence feels forced, why joy feels fleeting, or why life feels hollow despite achievements. The answer often lies in those forgotten pieces of the self that were abandoned in childhood. Facing the person you fear to be is, in part, about reuniting with that child who still lives within you. The process is deeply personal but also universal. Every culture, every family, every individual carries rules about who you're allowed to be. Maybe you were told to be strong and never cry, so you fear softness. Maybe you were told to be humble, so you fear ambition. Maybe you were told to be practical, so you fear imagination. The person you fear is not random. It is shaped by the values and wounds of the environment that raised you. To confront this fear is to step outside of inherited scripts and choose your own. This work takes courage because the shadow is not only filled with rejected strengths, it also contains painful memories and impulses you would rather ignore. Jung never promised that integrating the shadow would be easy. To sit with uncomfortable emotions, to admit envy, jealousy, or rage, to acknowledge mistakes without running from them, these acts demand honesty. But honesty is the soil from which transformation grows. The more willing you are to look directly at your shadow, the less power it has to control you in secret. Transformation doesn't mean you glorify every part of the shadow or act out every impulse. It means you understand them, accept them, and decide consciously how to use their energy. Anger can destroy, but it can also protect. Fear can paralyze, but it can also sharpen awareness. Even selfishness, when balanced, can be the foundation of healthy boundaries. Integration is about balance, not indulgence. It's about bringing unconscious patterns into awareness so you can live with choice rather than compulsion. The reward for this work is authenticity. When you are no longer ruled by fear of exposure, you stop performing and start living. You no longer waste energy maintaining the mask. Instead, that energy flows into your relationships, your work, and your passions. People sense when someone is genuine. Authenticity creates trust, and trust creates connection. The irony is that the very qualities you thought would make others reject you are often the ones that draw them closer once you embrace them. Living authentically doesn't mean you never feel fear again. Fear will always accompany growth, but it loses its ability to dominate you. You learn to hear its voice without obeying it. You learn to see it not as a wall, but as a doorway. Each time you step through, you expand your sense of self. You realize that you are not limited to the role you were given or the mask you created. You are far larger, more fluid, and more resilient than you imagined. So becoming the person you fear to be is really about becoming whole. It is about no longer running from yourself. It is about standing in both light and shadow and recognizing that both belong to you. This is the path of individuation, the path of truth, the path of freedom. And it always begins with a single question. If you stopped hiding, who would you finally allow yourself to be? The deeper you walk into this journey, the more you begin to notice how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious patterns. Decisions that seemed rational turn out to be strategies for avoiding fear. Relationships that ended badly reveal cycles you didn't realize you were repeating. Even your ambitions may be tied less to genuine desire and more to a need for approval. This realization can feel unsettling, but it is also empowering. Once you see the patterns, you can begin to change them. You are no longer a puppet pulled by hidden strings. You become an active participant in your own becoming. Jung believed that individuation is not about rejecting the ego or the persona, but about seeing them for what they are, useful but incomplete. The mask helps you function in society. The ego helps you navigate the world, but neither represents the fullness of who you are. Beneath them lies the self, a deeper center of being that seeks wholeness. The person you fear to be is often closer to this self than the person you currently pretend to be. That is why the fear feels so strong. The closer you get to truth, the more resistance the ego creates. Fear thrives in anticipation. We imagine humiliation, rejection, or failure, and the mind magnifies the possibility until it feels unbearable. Yet when we finally face the feared moment, it is rarely as devastating as imagined. Speaking up in a meeting may feel terrifying, but once the words are spoken, the fear collapses. Admitting a mistake may feel like exposure, but once the confession is made, relief follows. Again and again, life proves that fear is a bluff, a shadow larger than the substance it hides. To become the person you fear to be is to call fear's bluff repeatedly until you learn to trust your resilience. An important part of this journey is compassion. Without compassion, shadow work can turn into self-criticism. You might uncover anger and call yourself toxic, or uncover envy and call yourself petty. But judgment only drives these parts deeper underground. Compassion allows you to look honestly without shame. You begin to see that your anger was born of pain, your envy born of longing, your fear born of love for safety. With compassion, the shadow stops being a monster and starts being a wounded child. And like any child, it doesn't need punishment, it needs understanding. As you integrate, life begins to feel more aligned. You no longer seek validation as desperately because you are no longer split inside. Wholeness creates calm. Even when fear arises, it doesn't shake you in the same way because you know it is part of the process. You begin to respond to life rather than react. You begin to choose from awareness rather than compulsion. Slowly, you recognize that becoming the person you fear to be is not about changing into something else. It is about remembering who you already are beneath the conditioning. This path also transforms how you see others. When you recognize your own shadow, you become less judgmental of theirs. You see arrogance and think, perhaps it hides insecurity. You see cruelty and realize it may be born from unhealed pain. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, but it does mean you stop projecting your disowned traits onto others. You relate from empathy rather than defensiveness. In this way, shadow work not only frees you from yourself, but also reshapes your relationships with the world. Ultimately, the question is not whether fear will disappear. It won't. The question is whether you will let fear decide who you get to become. Every time you move toward the feared self, you reclaim a piece of your power. Every time you accept a hidden part, you step closer to wholeness. Over time, the person you once feared becomes the person you admire, because they embody the courage, honesty, and authenticity you have always longed for. So pause and ask yourself now, what mask have you been wearing too long, and what truth waits behind it? At this stage of the journey, you begin to see the biggest illusion of all, the belief that you are a fixed, unchanging self. For most of your life, you've probably carried a sense of who you are, a collection of labels, roles, and stories. You might think of yourself as shy or confident, logical or emotional, successful or a failure. But Jung and many other great thinkers discovered that this identity is only a surface-level construct. Beneath it lies something vast, fluid, and constantly evolving. The person you fear to be is not a stranger, but another version of yourself waiting to be integrated into the whole. The ego resists this realization because it thrives on certainty. It wants to define you in clear terms. This is who I am, this is who I am not. But the truth is far more mysterious. You are not a single role. You are a constellation of possibilities. Some of these possibilities are known to you, while others rest dormant in the unconscious, waiting for the right moment to emerge. When you accept this, fear begins to lose its grip. Instead of thinking, I could never be that kind of person, you begin to ask, what would happen if I allowed that part of me to live? That shift in perspective changes everything. Consider the archetypes Jung described: the hero, the wise mentor, the lover, the creator, the rebel. These patterns are not just stories and myths. They live within you. At different times in life, different archetypes rise to the surface. You may step into the role of the hero when facing a challenge, the mentor when guiding someone else, the lover when connecting deeply, or the rebel when breaking free from limitations. The person you fear to be might simply be an archetype you've ignored. For example, someone who always plays the responsible caregiver might secretly fear their inner rebel, worried it will bring chaos. Yet embracing that rebel energy could be the very force that allows them to set boundaries and reclaim freedom. This is why Jung believed individuation is not about becoming something new, but about becoming whole. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means holding contradictions within yourself and no longer seeing them as enemies. You can be strong and vulnerable, logical and intuitive, disciplined and creative. When you integrate the parts you once rejected, you become more flexible, more human, and more alive. Life feels less like a rigid script and more like an unfolding adventure. But here's the final twist: even the whole self is not the end of the story. Jung suggested that our personal unconscious is connected to something deeper, the collective unconscious, a vast, shared field of symbols, instincts, and wisdom passed down through humanity. This means you are not just an isolated being, but part of something far greater. The archetypes you embody are not just personal, they are universal. When you step into the person you fear to be, you are also stepping into a timeless human story that countless others have lived before you. That realization is humbling and empowering at the same time. So what does this mean for your life right now? It means that the fear you feel is not a signal to stop, but a signpost pointing you toward growth. It means that your discomfort is evidence of expansion, and it means that the version of yourself you've been avoiding may hold the wisdom, strength, and creativity you need most. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of my fear? The more powerful question is, what is my fear trying to show me? As you reflect on this, remember that the journey is not about rushing to a final destination. It is about walking courageously into each layer of yourself, facing what arises and allowing it to shape you. You may never reach a point where you feel completely finished, but that's the beauty of it. Life itself is the process of becoming again and again. And the more you embrace the parts of you that once scared you, the freer you become to live authentically. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, if you let go of every mask, every label and every fear, who might you become? And more importantly, are you ready to meet that version of yourself?